Hello students, today we are going to see chapter 17, 18 and 19 of The Prince by Nicolo Machiavelli. So starting with chapter 17, here we find that Machiavelli talks things concerning cruelty and clemency and whether it is better to be loved than feared. So in this chapter Machiavelli says that every prince will want to be considered merciful, but mercy should not be mismanaged. So here again citing Caesar Borgia, he says that by being cruel, he restored peace and order to Romagna. So no prince should mind being called cruel for keeping his subject peaceful and loyal. Punishing a few and thus averting disorder is better than allowing troubles to develop that will hurt many, according to Machiavelli. So new rulers cannot avoid seeming cruel because their states are insecure. So still a prince should not be too harsh or too fearful for the people. Here he further says, Machiavelli further says that if you cannot be both loved and feared, then it is better to be feared than loved. So men are generally fickle according to Machiavelli, afraid of danger and they are greedy. So when a prince benefits them, they will do anything for the prince, but when trouble comes, they will desert the prince. So people will break, according to Machiavelli, people will break ties of love if it is to their advantage, but fear of punishment they will never transgress. So a prince must be careful not to make himself hated even though he is feared. So to do this, he must keep his hands off his subjects' property and their women. So Machiavelli further says that people will sooner forget the death of their father than the loss of an inheritance. However, he says that when a prince commands an army, he must be cruel in order to control his troops. So in conclusion, he says that people love at their own wish, but fear at the prince's will. So a wise ruler will rely on what he can best control. So further analyzing this chapter, we find that here he says or continues his discussion of virtue that are not virtue. Machiavelli considers mercy and cruelty here in this chapter as well. And as with generosity and mercilessness, he comes down on the side of the supposedly bad quality. He bases his judgment on consideration of what benefits the people most. And he says that it is no use to be merciful if by doing so a prince allows disorder in his state to get out of control. So according to Machiavelli, a controlled amount of cruelty which harms a few can avert widespread violence and lawlessness which harms many. So mercy that allows the majority to suffer cannot properly be called mercy according to Machiavelli. This is an extremely old idea in Western jurisprudence, and one can still hear it cited as a justification for the imposition of punishment for crimes. Here he says that failing to punish wrongdoers penalize the innocent people who would be harmed by the criminal's future actions. An example which Machiavelli cites here, he again praises Caesar Borgia's policy for subduing the lawless Romagna region, which was described in chapter 8. Now he also criticized the Florentine government for failing to intervene when civil war broke out in Pistoia, which was under Florentine possession. So though the Florentines sent Machiavelli to investigate the situation, they did not do anything. As a result, many citizens died in the fighting. So Machiavelli is careful not to advocate cruelty for cruelty's sake. Here, as in chapter 8, he warns the princes not to constantly injure his subjects because this will make him hated. Instead, he must be cruel only when necessary to avoid greater wrongs. So even his assertion that the leaders of armies must be cruel is based on the maintenance of discipline. For undisciplined armies harm innocent citizens or even the ruler himself. So here Machiavelli says this philosophy leads him to logical conclusion that if a prince has to choose between being loved and being feared is at least safer for both the ruler and his subject. Now Machiavelli's typically dark view of human nature is on display in this chapter, as seen in his warning about those who swear they love you in good times but then desert you in bad times. Here he says that most cynical of statement in this chapter is this assertion that people are quicker to forgive the death of loved ones than the confiscation of their property. There could be no bleaker assessment of raw human selfishness, which has been or which was done by Machiavelli in this chapter about the human traits or human character. Now, surrounded by people like these, a prince is indeed safer if he can control them by fear, because love is so fleeting or short-lived and unreliable according to Machiavelli. Now, moving to chapter 18, here he says that he talks about things concerning the way in which prince should keep faith. So here he says that everyone knows that prince should keep his word, but we see that the princes who have accomplished the most have been accomplished at deception. Now he says that a prince may fight with laws, which is the way of human being, or with force, which is the way of animals. Here he says that a prince should imitate the fox in cunning as well as the lion in strength. According to Machiavelli, a wise prince should never keep his word when it would go against his interests, because he can expect others to do the same. So in order to pull it off, according to Machiavelli, the prince must be a good liar, but he should always find people willing to be deceived. So to sum it up, here it is said that it is useful to seem, according to Machiavelli, it is useful to seem to be virtuous, but you must be ready to act the opposite way if the situation requires it. So according to Machiavelli, a prince should do good if he can, but be ready to do evil if he must. Yet, a prince must be careful to always act in a way that appears virtuous, for many can see you, but few know how you really are, according to Machiavelli. So this is the advice of Machiavelli to the prince again. If a ruler concurs and maintains his state, everyone will praise him, judging his action by their outcome. So it is not necessary for the prince to maintain his one-to-one image with the people. Now, further analyzing this chapter, we find that this chapter concludes Machiavelli's discussion on the qualities of a prince, like qualities a prince should display or have. Now, keeping his feet firmly in the real world as he promised, he begins by stating that even though everyone assumes princes should keep their word, experiences show that those who do not keep their words get the better of those who do. So this is the conclusion of Machiavelli. Further, this is Machiavelli's justification for deceit, because you can expect other princes not to honor their words to you. You should not feel obligated to honor your word to them. So in this bestial, or we can say inhuman and savage world, princes must act like beasts, imitating the clever fox instead of relying only on strength as does the lion. So in the world which is full of deceivers, according to Machiavelli, there also must be someone to deceive. And Machiavelli finds that there are plenty of people willing to overlook all kinds of deceit as long as the state is peaceful and prosperous. He further says that the prince's control of his public image gets special, or prince should give special attention to his public image. Now, a prince must always appear to be truthful, merciful and religious, even if he must sometimes act in the opposite way, according to Machiavelli. So interestingly, these are the very same qualities he condemns Agathocles for lacking in chapter 8, that we had seen in chapter 8 obviously. But here he advises the princes to dispense with them when necessary. But the great mass of people will never see the prince as he really is. They will see only the image he projects. So the few insiders who know the prince's true nature will do nothing to harm him as long as the people support the prince, and the people will support him as long as he has been successful, or the prince has been successful. Here Machiavelli sounds remarkably like a modern spin doctor advising a politician on how to get good press. That means the publicity stunt that a politician must maintain, right? Now moving on to chapter 19, here he talks that one should avoid being despised and hated. Now this is again Machiavelli's advice to the prince, that a prince must avoid becoming hated or despised. Now taking the property or the women of his subject will make him hated. Now being light-hearted or perky, indecisive and effeminate means like a woman, will make him or the prince despised. all a prince's action should show is seriousness, strength and decisiveness. He should be very determined. Now, the best defense against internal threat such as conspiracy is to be neither hated nor despised according to Machiavelli. If a conspirator thinks that killing the prince will enrage the people, he will think twice before killing the prince. Now, wise princes are careful not to antagonize the nobles and to keep the people happy. Machiavelli again cites the example of France, and he says that in France the parliament restrains the ambition of the nobles and favors the people without directly involving the king, so that he cannot be accused of favoritism. Machiavelli says that princes should let others do the unpleasant task, bring for themselves what will make them look good or will create a good image of them in front of the subjects. Now, some people may object that the careers of the Roman emperors go against this argument which has been given by or put forward by Machiavelli, because many of them were greatly admired yet were still assassinated. So, this is because they had to deal with their soldiers and they could not satisfy both the soldiers who wanted warlike leaders and the people who wanted peace. Now, citing example of Marcus, Pertinax and Alexander, who were all compassionate and just, but only Marcus escaped assassination because he was hereditary ruler and did not owe his power to the army. Again, citing examples, here he says, he talks about Commodus, Severus, Antonius and Maximinus. So, all were cruel and greedy, and only Severus escaped assassination because he was so cunning and ruthless, and because he kept up a splendid reputation of himself. But in Machiavelli's time, princes do not have the same need to satisfy their armies, because armies are not used to being together for long period and controlling whole province the way they were. The way Roman armies were. Instead, princes should satisfy the people who are more powerful. Now, analyzing this chapter, we find that here Machiavelli talks about conspiracy and assassination, and conspiracy and assassination occupy Machiavelli's attention throughout this chapter. So, the best way to avoid this danger is to avoid being hated or despised by one's subject, according to Machiavelli. Now, by despised, Machiavelli means to be held in contempt or to be regarded with no respect. So, in the state, there are two main groups: the prince must quote, the nobles and the people. This is a theme pulled from chapter 9 that we had already read, obviously. Although a prince must not alienate the nobles, he must win over the people because they are the majority, and their ill will can cost a prince his place and his life. So, hated and despised princes are targets for assassination, because the assassins could conclude that the people will support killing the ruler. Now, plots such as these were real concern for Renaissance rulers. Machiavelli offers an example by citing the 1445 assassination of Annibale Bentivoglio, ruler of Bologna, noting that popular support enabled the family to keep their power despite the desperate situation after the assassination. In Machiavelli's own lifetime in Florence in 1478, the Pazzi conspiracy against the Medici had resulted in the injury of Lorenzo the Magnificent and the death of Lorenzo's brother. So, in both the cases, the assassins were from rival powerful families. They were not disgruntled subjects. As if acknowledging this, Machiavelli observes that there is no real defense against a determined assassin, because anyone who is not afraid to die can kill a ruler. So, nonetheless, he maintains that popular support is the best prevention. Now, here about balancing the conflicting demands of the people and the nobles, Machiavelli offers the interesting example of France's parliamentary government, which allowed participation by both the aristocracy and the commoners. Rather, here he says that presenting it as a democratic innovation, he offers it as a way of increasing the absolute ruler's power, taking pressure off the prince by putting competing interests into neutral forum in effect, giving unpleasant tasks to the others so that they do not damage the prince's popularity. That means, by doing the unpleasant task, or assigning the unpleasant tasks to the nobles, prince is able to maintain his image amongst the people. Now, in the middle of this argument, Machiavelli embarks on a long discussion about the many Roman emperors, good and bad, who were assassinated. He concludes that most of them were undone by their powerful and bloodthirsty armies, a problem that the princes of Machiavelli's time need not worry about. His more interesting observation here is somewhat lost in the analysis, that nearly all of the rulers were killed regardless of their qualities and actions. Some did not, some did one thing and others did the opposite, but all came to the basically same end. So the key of their success or failure is whether they adapted their actions to their armies and political circumstances. Now, this theme reappears in chapter 25 again, where Machiavelli discusses the effect of fortune on human affairs. So, this is all for today's lecture. Thank you all.